Good morning, everyone. Here's an update for what's going on around Ukraine for September 10th. Before I get into it, I just want to say my condolences to the United Kingdom for the loss of Queen Elizabeth. She was an absolute legend. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. She was a legendary leader for 7 decades. So her loss is felt worldwide. The United States, we don't really have something like that. Like our presidents come and go, much like your prime ministers do. Well, maybe not as fast as your prime ministers. You guys seem to get a new prime minister every like 2 years, but we don't have something like that. We don't have a royal family, so it's hard for us to kind of conceptualize the loss and the feeling of it. So just want to express my condolences and say that she was just an absolute legend when it came to foreign policy and diplomacy across the world. So moving on to what's going on in Ukraine. Senior Ukrainian officials said that the main artery for Russian forces in the Kharkiv region has been severed. Now, I did my operations update just about, an hour and a half ago, and these are just updates coming in that I've seen from some of the OSINT sources saying that the Ukrainians have actually entered Izium. They haven't necessarily taken it as there's pockets of Russian fighting, but more than likely in the next 24 to 48 hours, we'll see Izium fall to the Ukrainians. Ukrainian members of parliament said that the next few days, military experts are projecting that the main logistics artery, that road I talked about in my operations update, as well as the rail line, will be severed completely and be under full Ukrainian control. This is that road that runs about 125 kilometers from Kharkiv down into the Donetsk region. Now, Ukrainian forces have apparently opened up a new front as well in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, specifically in Lysychansk. They said that there is fighting taking place in that city. Russian forces are continuing to offer financial incentives to attract fighters in Ukraine. A Russian Mill blogger reported that the Russian armed forces are forming what's called storm assault detachments and are offering individual recruits financial rewards of about $840 for every square kilometer of land captured in Ukraine. And I'm like, damn, why didn't the U.S. have that? Because the U.S. captured the entirety of Iraq and Afghanistan while I was in. I'd not be making videos right now because I'd be filthy ass rich. But anyways, that's pretty much a poor way to do things because it's hard to track. The Mill blog space for Russia is specifying that Russian armed forces are forming these new detachments with elements of failed Russian units. So either they're just demoralized already, or they're trying to pull in from their Russian Combat Army Reserve initiative, which also failed miserably to generate any volunteers. More than likely, they're going to be filled with people that are what the army calls voluntold. Basically, they say you go or you'll be punished. However, the problem is the reason they're not getting any volunteers is the payment disparities between units and even individual members are starting to show, and Russian soldiers are beginning to talk about it. And it's causing a bunch of rifts within combat forces. A wounded Russian service member published an appeal addressing the Chelyabinsk Oblast governor, stating that his local government is not paying him the regional bonuses promised for participating in the special military operation, quote unquote. So the issue is this is getting out that Russia's payment system is completely flawed, and it depends on if your leadership is influential enough to actually get you the payments. Otherwise, you probably aren't getting them. It's like almost like a feudal system from like the 1500s or something like that. This isn't really an effective modern day way to compensate soldiers. But the Russians also have other means, such as join or die, basically. Or join or go to prison, or join or we fuck your family up, or something like that. The Ukrainian military intelligence director reported that Ukrainian forces destroyed the Russian 237th Guard Air Assault Regiment. That's yet another entire regiment's destroyed in the last 24 hours. They said that the regiment ceased to exist, this is a quote, ceased to exist due to death or injury of all servicemen. So just bad news. It's just a bad news week for Putin, which is a good thing. The United Nations released a report on September 9th, detailing poor Russian treatment of Ukrainian POWs. Fucking surprise, surprise. And also detained civilians. The head of the Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine, named Matilda Bogner, said that Russian authorities are preventing the UN officials from visiting Ukrainian prisoners of war, again, so totally shocking, that are currently held in the Russian-occupied territories. Now, Matilda Bogner stated the UN has documented instances of torture, poor treatment, lack of adequate food, lack of water, lack of health care, bad sanitation, etc. at these POW sites. She reported that an infectious disease broke out at a penal colony in the Donetsk Oblast, and unfortunately, the Russian forces, rather than trying to treat them, just killed 53 of POWs. So, more war crimes taking place, more atrocious behavior being committed by the Russians. It's just par for the course at this point. Top U.S. officials have on Thursday unveiled $2.8 billion in new military and humanitarian aid for Ukraine and Eastern European allies, marking a shift from what we've been doing, which is just-in-time supplies of ammunition and weaponry, to a more long-term approach of equipment across all of the nations along NATO's eastern front with Russia. The announcement came as Secretary of State Blinken arrived in Kyiv for his second trip since the start of the war, as well as Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and the Joint Chiefs Chair Mark Milley were huddled in Ramstein to discuss with their global counterparts how to create a long-term initiative to sustain efforts against Russia. Now, the immediate aid for the Ukrainian military comes in the form of a new $675 million transfer of U.S. Ammunition, armored vehicles, and anti-armor weapons, but the more expansive amount of money is a $2.2 billion financing package. Will be split in half going to Ukraine, the other half going to roughly 18 regional neighbors extending from the Baltic Sea to the Mediterranean Sea. This is going to cut a pretty wide swath along the Russians' entire border, and the U.S. is building a noose around Russia for it to hang itself really without losing a single U.S. soldier. It's actually quite an impressive policy. The bigger issue is now that we need to focus on the next 3 to 5 years, which is defending NATO and NATO countries from a Russia that likely is not backing down, whether it can win here or not. As long as Putin is in the Kremlin, he's already pulled the trigger. He can't unpull it, and now he realizes it's either he sees this thing through or he dies trying. So this is what the United States and Western nations are facing right now. Poland announced that it will be buying 96 AH-64 Apache attack helicopters. This would make Poland the second largest holder of what is essentially the most deadly attack helicopter in the world. It seems to me that Poland is trying to become the next major military power within the European mainland continent, because the UK is obviously going to be very strong. So is France, frankly. But because of this, I think that I don't blame them. I mean, whether it was the Russians, you look at their history, the Russians, the Germans, the Austrians, the Hungarians, people tended to push Poland around, and maybe no longer. The difference now is they have the backing of the U.S. as the U.S. kind of pivoted somewhat from Germany into Poland due to favorable terms, etc. Throughout the Obama and then the Trump administration. That policy has been carried through by Biden. It looks like the major power shift in Poland or in Europe is taking place, and Poland might be one of the top going forward. Now, I talked about how bad things are for Putin. The Council of Smolenskoye, I think I'm saying that right, but it's a municipal formation in St. Petersburg, has adopted a decision to call in the deputies of the Russian State Duma, which is the highest legislative body in Russia, to bring treason charges against President Putin in order to dismiss him from office. The cracks are starting to form, at least in the metro areas of Russia. This was announced by the Smolenskoye Ministry of Defense. The decision was supported by the majority, which is like their National Guard, I guess, for that oblast. But the decision was supported by the majority of the deputies in that region. He posted text of what the document said. He said that the, quote, young, able-bodied Russian citizens are dying during this war. The Russian economy is suffering. NATO is expanding to the east, and Ukraine is receiving new weapons, although Putin said that he would demilitarize all of the country in his goals of the invasion. They went on to say, we believe President Putin's decision to launch the special military operation harms the security of Russia and its citizens. Given that, we ask you as the deputy of the State Duma to come up with a proposal to bring charges of treason against the president of the Russian Federation and remove him from office. So that's really strong words. This is an open attack on Putin from a government. This isn't just like media. This isn't just individual protests. Governments are now starting to stand up and say this is something we don't like. All I have to say is stay away from windows. But that's it for today. Have a good rest of your weekend, everyone. And I'll see you maybe later tonight. I don't know what I'm going to post next.